Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our final Wednesday workshop for this summer's virtual professional development series. My name is Dr. Jane Indorf, and I'm the manager of undergraduate and graduate programs with the Leadership Alliance, which I'm sure you all know very well by now. And I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. I moderated the first one and now the last one. So today's workshop is all about finances in graduate school. And we got a lot of great questions on this hot topic. Our panel of experts will be offering insight, advice, and sharing their own personal experiences during today's session. So we have 4 panelists with us today: PhD candidates Selena Cho, Alyssa Hayes, George Walters-Marrah, and Dr. Emily Roberts, who is a personal finance expert. And now I'll introduce each of our panelists. Selena Cho received her bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 2021 and is currently pursuing a PhD in mechanical engineering at the University of Utah. That was a big move, Selena. Growing up in Canton, Massachusetts, she actively participated in athletics such as track and field, lacrosse, and field hockey, which greatly influenced her research focus on human biomechanics. Her current research focuses on using wearable sensors to study turning gait in daily life, with the aim of gaining insights into human movement patterns and advancing personalized digital health. Complementing her academic pursuits, Selena finds joy in the Utah outdoor adventures, including skiing, mountain biking, climbing, and trail running. She is forever picking up hobbies, with the current ones being leatherwork and welding. Cool. Alyssa Hayes is a nuclear engineering PhD candidate at the University of Tennessee. She uses Monte Carlo tools to simulate and analyze impurity transport in fusion reactors. Excessive concentrations of larger impurities in a fusion plasma can be detrimental to the reactor heat efficiency because impurities cool the plasma by colliding with other particles in the plasma and then emitting the energy in the form of radiation. I never knew that. Working with other grad students, she is also a founder of CRANE Physics, C-R-A-N-E, I'm assuming is an acronym, a group that teaches computational research methods to other students from underrepresented groups. In her free time, she advocates for clean energy, goes bouldering, and watches One Piece like George. George Walters-Marrah grew up in Miami, Florida, and studied molecular microbiology at the University of Central Florida. His fascination with infectious processes led him to work in various labs with expertise in microbiology, biochemistry, structural biology, and biophysics, where he developed computational tools to improve lab productivity. George is also passionate about outreach and mentoring students from underserved communities. In his free time, he enjoys playing soccer, fantasy basketball, and watching One Piece. I don't know this show, One Piece. At Stanford, he aims to combine molecular microbiology, cell biology, biochemistry, computational systems biology, and biophysics to study host pathogen interactions and bacterial pathogenesis. He plans to create a damp research environment that merges traditional biological techniques with computational and biophysical methods. And last, but certainly not least, we have Dr. Emily Roberts, who is back with us again. She is a personal finance educator specializing in early career PhDs. Through her business, Personal Finance for PhDs, she equips graduate students, postdocs, and PhDs with real jobs to make the most of their money. She gives seminars at universities and for associations, interviews grad students and PhDs on her podcast, serves as a money coach, and creates courses and workshops on taxes, investing, and more. Emily holds a PhD in biomedical engineering from Duke University and lives in Southern California with her husband and 2 children. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. If there's a little more that you want to say about your background, you can do that, or we can just jump right into the questions. Ready for questions? Okay. I'm sure we'll learn more about you as I ask questions. And I'll look up that show later. One Piece. Okay. All right. So So, George, I'm going to start with you. So what are some key factors to consider, or what factors did you consider when financing your graduate school education?
So for me, so I'm gonna take this question as like kind of having enough money to afford to go to graduate school. So for me, when I was like applying to graduate school and choosing my school, I made sure to not only look at the stipend, like the raw number, I made sure to kind of like compare it to cost of living. So my last two, like I was kind of like ranking which schools I wanted to go to, and the last two on my list had like a 10K difference in stipend of that they were offering me. But if you use a cost of living calculator and compare them, they're actually pretty comparable. So that was kind of like the main consideration, and kind of looking at the number, comparing cost of living, and also speaking a lot to graduate students that actually went there about, oh, do you feel comfortable with the amount of money that you make? Can you do like fun things in your free time with your money? Or do you feel like, oh, this is barely enough money to live? And it's kind of like asking like the grad students that are currently there was very helpful, because I realized that grad students kind of have no reason to lie to you. When it comes to these type of things. So those were kind of like the main things I was considering if when I was like looking about financing my graduate school education. And then one thing that was important to me is that, so I'm originally from Miami, and then I'm currently doing school in California. So I also asked my graduate schools if they could provide any travel kind of funding for me, or transitioning funding. And like I actually chose to go to the university that gave me a little bit of funding to help me move from Miami to over here to California. So those were like kind of like the main things I was thinking about when I was like, okay, how am I going to have enough money to afford this while I'm going through graduate school?
Thank you. That's great advice. I wish I had had that advice when I was applying to grad school. I think that has come up with for us a lot is speaking to graduate students who are already there. Selena, do you have anything to add to that?
I pretty much do the same thing of like looking at the cost of living, where I don't think I could have like afford living in a big city comfortably, because like big cities are really expensive. I'm originally from Boston. Boston cost of living is like very, very high. Like, you know, one bedroom is probably like at least like $1,900 around Boston right now. So like in Salt Lake, I was like, well, I'm into outdoors, I'm into skiing, and like Salt Lake itself is significantly cheaper than Boston. It's like right now, I think for rent, I pay for like about $700. And I am living very comfortably in Salt Lake. And because of that, I don't have that like financial burden, which is like, you know, like financial stress is like a real thing. It's really real. So like being in Salt Lake, I'm very fortunate to not have to worry about housing or rent or like cost of living like that. So that's like one of my biggest factors in deciding schools.
Great, thank you. Alyssa, is there anything additional that you considered, or what were some things that you thought about in deciding?
My number one was like the work that I would be doing and my advisor. I had the privilege of doing a lot of undergraduate research. So for those of you who maybe still have like another year before you have to apply to grad school, if you don't already have undergraduate research, I strongly recommend getting some, because it opens a lot of doors if grad school is something that you really want to do. So I, like, my undergraduate research had caught the attention of my current advisor here at the University of Tennessee. And I was really deciding between moving here, which spoilers I did do, or staying where I did my bachelor's degree at the University of Illinois, because I loved the professor that I worked for there and I loved working for him. But they couldn't offer me more money. So I was doing like a whole back and forth, and I can talk about this more later maybe. I did some negotiation with my current advisor, and basically I was like, I'll stay in Illinois if like for less money, unless something changes about this offer. And that's how I ended up getting like a top off fellowship and also a laptop. So there's like a lot of ways, like a lot of other things to think about outside of the stipend. George mentioned like, will they cover your moving costs? UT did not cover my moving costs, but they did give me health insurance and a laptop. So there's a lot of different like non-stipend ways that you can also like compare different departments financially.
Thank you. Emily, is there any other factors that you think students should consider?
Yeah, I just want to say that George and Selena and Alyssa did a way better job with this than I did when I was in the prospective graduate student stage. So kudos to all of them. But this is one of the reasons why I got into teaching what I do, is because I want more people to be as proactive as they were in this process. What I want to add is that I think it's really, really valuable to, before you even apply to graduate school, before you're like done with selecting your list, to understand what the funding norms are in your field. So thank you to Alyssa, because she pointed out during our prep for this that we are all kind of in like the STEM area, like engineering-y. And so there are different funding norms in engineering versus biosciences versus other kinds of sciences versus humanities, or, you know, there's different funding norms across different places. And so all of us, I think, could be described as like fully funded, which means that our tuition and fees are either completely or almost completely paid for, and we get a stipend that's like pretty decent because they were all very intentional, right, about getting that decent stipend. But that's not going to be the case in all programs. And so once you get into your admission season where you're getting your offers, it's really valuable to know in your field what's a good offer, what's a average offer, and what's a subpar offer. So you can tell how much that school really is recruiting you.
Where are some places that students can find that information?
Well, there are a number of stipend databases that are now available. I run one called PhD Stipends, which is phdstipends.com. And that's a very like broad one. It covers like any university in the US, any field. It's all self-reported data, so it's not like verified by me or anyone, although we're working on that. But there are other like sort of discipline-specific stipend databases as well, as other people are working on this too that do have verified data. So those kinds of databases would be great ones. Like I think another one is like biology PhD stipends, and please everyone else chime in if you know others or in the chat or something. Biology PhD stipends is another one. So you can check those to see what people are getting, even in a specific department at a specific university.
Great, thank you. That's so helpful. And I think it was either Selena or Alyssa mentioned a cost of living calculator. I think it was Selena. So one question we got was, how can you assess the affordability of grad programs and determine if they align with your financial resources? So Selena, I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, and also where would you find like a cost of living calculator? Are those just on the internet?
So MIT has a living wage calculator. You can go by the state and then go by the county. It really breaks it down on like what an average like stipend or salary that you need to live there. I think that's a great way to start. What was the second question you asked?
Yeah, how would you assess affordability of a grad program and determine if it aligns with your financial resources?
Yeah, so I would say affordability is what your lifestyle is. If you like living in big city, you like going out to coffee shops, you like doing that, you should maybe like start budgeting on seeing like how much you spend per month. Like knowing your own budget before you like move to somewhere is pretty important. So for me, I don't normally go out to eat. I like cook a lot at home, and like most of my money is spent on gear and like stuff like that, on gas when I travel. So like I have that budget set up for how much I typically spend. So I think starting to budget in like Excel sheet or whatever online is like a great way to start to know how much you spend, and then start from there to look at where you can potentially live and have that lifestyle that you want.
I think I could add to this a little bit with the so I can only speak from my own experience. So I'm in a program that pays for my tuition and gives me a stipend. So in my experience, the affordability is not really attached to the grad program. It's more attached to your location. So I live in California and near Silicon Valley, so it's extremely expensive here. So, and not only that, there's like the taxes are also super high. So that's not so much connected to like my actual program. That's connected to like, okay, I'm living in California in a super expensive area. So when you're looking at affordability, I would more so focus on the location than the actual graduate program or graduate school. It's especially if, you know, the program is paying for your tuition and giving you a little stipend, like kind of like looking at the stipend that they're giving you, but also kind of like the location and like, is there state taxes? Like, what is rent looking like? Is food super expensive? Stuff like that.
I want to add like another quick thing. This isn't very common. I would say this is uncommon, but there are departments that will send you to like work physically at like a national lab somewhere or like a science user facility somewhere, and you're technically a grad student somewhere else. I know people who like, they do a bunch of work at the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab and they're there for months, but they're technically students at UT. Or I have friends who are grad students at the University of Illinois, but they're physically out in Oak Ridge. And when there's like really big cost differences, some departments will also give you like the pay boost to account for the extra cost of living. I did like a 3-month thing at D3D in San Diego, which has a way higher cost of living in Knoxville. And I went to one of those online like cost of living calculator things for the cities and compared Knoxville to San Diego. They didn't even like double check me. I just like told them, I was like, the online calculator said the cost of living difference is 150%. So they gave me 150% of my stipend for 3 months.
Okay, so for our next question, I'm going to start with Emily. So what are the primary sources of funding that are available to graduate students, both internal and external?
Yeah, this is a great follow-up on like understanding the norms of your field. So I'm going to speak primarily about, I guess, funded programs, because obviously if you're going for a master's degree and some type, maybe occasional PhDs that are not funded, I'm not talking about those. So there are two kind of high level categories of income that you might receive as a graduate student. One is employee income. So if you are technically hired as a part-time employee of the university, that's one type. The other type is if you have what I call awarded income, which is like fellowship, scholarship type income. And that's when you wouldn't be considered an employee of the university, but you're being given this money basically to further your own research interests and development. So on the employee side, we usually call these assistantships, although that terminology is not necessarily universal. There's multiple different types of assistantship. So one is a teaching assistantship where you are either assistant teaching or fully teaching one or more courses. Another is a research assistantship where usually the case is that you would be working off of a grant, maybe that your advisor has, and your research is going to go into your own dissertation. So it's like you get to use that towards your own interests in furthering, your progress towards your PhD. And then there's what I call kind of like graduate assistantships. There's not really a totally high level word for this. So basically when you're running some kind of like administrative work or administrative program for the university. So you might be able to tell just between those three types of assistantships that some of them are doing a job that doesn't have to do with your dissertation too much. And one of them is doing a job where you get to advance your own dissertation. So to me, there's a big difference between those. And you can look at the offers that you get. Okay, is my money tied to having to teach courses? Is that within my professional goals of like wanting to have experience with teaching? If the answer is yes, you might be happy with that funding source. If the answer is no, you might not be happy with that funding source. On the fellowship side of things, that's generally considered to be like a more prestigious or more flexible kind of funding. Oftentimes fellowships, like the stipend you get, could usually be higher than what you would get with an assistantship. So they're sort of considered maybe a little bit better, but again, it depends on your professional goals. So again, looking into what types of offers you get and what the norms are in your field. Like in some fields, it's very, very typical to have to TA your entire way through graduate school because those programs are funded based on the tuition dollars coming from the other students of the university. In other fields, it's very common to work as a research assistantship. In other fields, it would be very, very amazing and prestigious to get a fellowship. In other places, it doesn't matter so much. So this is where it's really, really important to understand the norms of your field. I mentioned those stipend databases earlier, but what I should have also said, kind of playing off what George said earlier, is that you really just need to talk with people who are in your field, but more advanced than you. That could be professors at your current university, could be your advisor, it could could be alums from your university who've gone on to similar programs. But talking with at least a few people will help you better understand those norms and the types of funding that are typical in your field. Again, so you can differentiate between a great offer that you really match well with and an offer that probably isn't going to serve your professional interests as well.
Right, thank you. So speaking of teaching assistantships, so if you have a research assistantship, that's something that you could fold into your own research. But a teaching assistantship is like doing extra stuff. So how hard is it to integrate a teaching assistant position into trying to get your research done and your own coursework? How do you balance that? Selena, do you want to answer that one first?
So I never TA during graduate, so I'm actually funded by these external fundings that Emily mentioned, which is the NSF GRFP. So GRFP stands for Graduate Research Fellowship Program. I highly recommend anyone to apply to it. Like having this funding allows you to apply to any school and have a higher chance of getting accepted or getting in, and you're basically self-funded, which is quite nice. So for my GRFP, my senior year, sorry, it's a bit loud. So for the GRFP, I actually asked my current PI, who I applied during my senior year. So during senior year, I applied for it and I got it surprisingly. And then I could have taken this funding to anywhere and my PI probably would have been fine with it. But now I'm currently working with my PI with my independent funding, and allows me to do whatever research I want instead of on like that grant project that would have to fund me on like a specific research. So that's been really nice.
And Alyssa and George, did you do any teaching assistantships, or have you done them?
So I haven't done any teaching assistantships, but I have done stuff that's not my dissertation. I could talk a little bit about balancing it. So the right now I'm a program leader for a summer research program here at Stanford, and I kind of balancing that with like doing my dissertation and stuff. So I would say that like kind of balancing that comes to a lot of planning and kind of like so my calendar is like super packed and I have all of these like reminders and stuff like that. So I take an approach of like kind of trying to plan everything out so that I have time to do all these different things. It's been working out well. So I'm actually also mentoring a undergrad at the same time, and like kind of taking initiative to really plan out your experiments, plan out when you'll be like in the case of TAing, when you'll be grading papers, or in the case of my position, when I'll be like planning these events for the undergrads. That's kind of like how I've been dealing with it, kind of just being really, on top of your schedule, because like time can really get away from you and then you don't want to be stressed out doing things last minute. And I could also talk about fellowships, unless we're going to talk about that later.
No, we can go ahead into that now.
Yeah, so like for me, I also got the NSF GRFP. So I got, going into graduate school, I got 3 different fellowships. So the NSF, I actually applied with a PI from Cornell that I did an internship with, and I didn't end up going to Cornell, and I do absolutely nothing related to what I wrote my proposal on. So like applying to the NSF GRFP was something like random is fine. So like the NSF GRFP funds you, not the research. So which is nice. So like don't worry if you apply to something that you might not want to do in graduate school with the NSF. I got another fellowship called the Stanford Graduate Research Fellowship. So this is an internal fellowship, and they kind of just like reviewed my graduate school application. I was just like, okay, we think you're a good candidate. We're going to offer this fellowship to you. So I would basically apply to this fellowship with my graduate school application. So it's nice because if you work really hard on your graduate school application and it looks really good, they might offer you additional money. Other schools also offered me additional money just through my graduate school application. And the third fellowship I got was from this program that I applied to after I got accepted. So there's I don't know how many schools have stuff like this, but I applied to this like graduate school program like that. The application is only open to people that already committed to going to the school. I applied to that program, I got in, and they gave me a fellowship associated with that. So like once you accept the offer and you're like ready to go to graduate school, like still pay attention, still ask questions, because if I wasn't like proactive in asking current students about what opportunities are available, I wouldn't have gotten this third fellowship because I wouldn't know that the program existed. But those are some fellowships that I got going into graduate school.
Okay, thank you. And Alyssa, how are you funded?
So unfortunately, I guess we're not very diverse in the way of like grad school teaching assistants, because I also have not had to TA as a grad student. Although I did TA as an undergrad, but that's like an entirely different experience and like pretty unrelated. So the way that at least it works for like my field, like most nuclear departments, I can't speak to like non-nuclear departments, is that TAs typically are not funded, either they're funded the same or they're funded a little bit less than research assistants. That at least like in my specific department at UT, like the hierarchy of pay is like full research assistant, like half research assistant or RA, half TA, and then full TA. Where a lot of like people who are full TAs want to like kind of move up a little bit so that way they can be paid for their time spent working towards their dissertation. There are like, I don't think it's, there may be departments out there where like you just get paid the stipend regardless of which type of assistantship you have, but I think it's pretty common to have like that RAs get paid a little bit more than TAs. I want to answer, is it okay if like, because they're like related, can I like address some of the questions in the chat?
Definitely, please.
Okay. So like Emily asked, if you earn outside funding, but you want teaching experience, can you receive additional funding as a TA? So first of all, that will depend on your advisor's like specific situation and how they plan to like fund your research if you're talking with them. So it's definitely like an individual conversation to have that's different from department to department, different from institution to institution and advisor to advisor. Just because every like individual professor has their like graduate students research funded differently. But it is rare, at least in my experience, for grad students to be like, I really want to have teaching experience. I really want a TA. That's something that like advisors would be like, oh, I have to provide TAs for these classes. And this person wants a TA. And especially if there's a class that's super relevant to your research, that can be like a big plus for you. It's something I would definitely mention to potential advisors. But whether or not like it would be extra funding like on top of like your external funding is dependent on, again, your specific situation and what that external funding source is. Because some external funding sources say, this is your funding and you do not get a stipend from your university. So it really just depends on like the specifics. Other outside funding might be like, this is like $2,000 on top of whatever your university is giving you, in which case, yes, you would get both. On outside funding, I also wanted to address Barrington's question about our international students given equal opportunity to access like assistantships for normal research and teaching assistantships. Yeah, it seems pretty equal, but for outside funding, it depends on, again, on the source. Some sources of outside funding are like limited to US citizens, for instance, or like they'll have other limitations.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the teaching stuff too with the additional funding. So at Stanford, actually the first 4 years of, well, Stanford Biosciences in particular, the first 4 years of your PhD are usually paid by Stanford unless you have a fellowship, and which makes like funding way more flexible. And then for getting paid, some TAs actually get additional pay, but it depends on like the course you're TAing for. And the program as well. Like there's some programs that TAing is like required, and there's some programs that TAing is not. My program TAing is like optional. I came in wanting to TA, and then I changed my mind like a year or two in. And one thing I forgot to mention was that at Stanford specifically, I don't know if this is the case for other schools, maybe they have similar things, but since I came in with more than one fellowship, they actually bumped up my stipend. So like the SGF bumped up my stipend for the first 3 years. And since I also got the NSF, they actually bumped my stipend for the first 5 years. So I have, so getting multiple fellowships can also be beneficial for other things as well. And I think someone asked, like, is a PhD stipend sufficient for living with your spouse? I think that depends on your location. For me at least, I would say no, because if I had to pay for housing for like 2 people just on my stipend, food for 2 people and all of that, I don't think that would be affordable where I live. But if your spouse also has some income, it could be doable. But that might be different for other areas.
Can I jump in on that?
Oh, go ahead.
So there's this phrase, at least here in the States, not that common, but it's 2 can live as cheaply as 1. I do not believe this to be true if you are at the lower income and lower consumption levels. Now, can 2 people share a 1-bedroom apartment? Sure. If your stipend was already going to require you to have roommates and you're adding like your spouse into that situation, that might be a little much. Also, 2 people eat twice as much as 1 person eats, and 2 people use utility. Like there are lots of things when you're living close to a baseline level of spending that are definitely going to feel like more. So because the way this question was phrased, I think this person is an international student. And so I think that I have seen this many times, that international students bring their spouses who are not allowed to work in the US, and they're trying to have both them live on just the 1 PhD stipend. And unfortunately, I hear a lot about the struggle of that. Now, it could be that people are doing it okay and I'm not hearing about their struggle, but I do hear about the struggle. So if you're in this situation, I want you to be very, very careful and very, very discerning and realistic about what this is going to look like, because you need health insurance for your spouse. Like there's a lot of expensive things that come along with bringing your spouse along. So you would definitely have to, I would say, make sure that your offer is like well above the living wage for 1 person in your area, which unfortunately a lot of PhD student stipends do not meet that level. So be really, really careful.
On a positive note, if your spouse is able to work, for me, it has made things cheaper and easier. There are a lot of ways in which we take care of each other when the other person isn't feeling great, chore wise. And so I have been splitting my rent costs with my long-term partner for the last 4 years, which has made finding a place to live easier, especially as rent costs have gone up significantly in Knoxville. So if your spouse is able to work, then it can make things a little bit cheaper. But if they're not able to work, I personally would not recommend trying to support 2 people on just a PhD stipend.
Great advice. Thank you. So now I'm going to move on to a little bit of a different topic. We got a question about taking out loans. So the question is, how can we save money for grad school to prevent taking loans? And if you do have to take a loan in grad school, what are some options to avoid the interest rate from accumulating over the years? And how do you pay off the loans as soon as you graduate or within 1 year of graduation? And I'm going to let Emily start with this one.
That question had a lot of elements, so I might forget some. So please help me out there. First of all, try to not take out student loans. Please hold out for a situation. If you are applying to PhD programs, hold out for an offer that you expect is going to allow you to live without having to take out student loan debt. Now, things happen, emergencies come up, circumstances change. Maybe you have a child in graduate school. Things could happen that would make it make sense to take out student loans. It's a good financial decision to take out student loans under some circumstances to help you finish your degree. But I don't want you voluntarily going into that situation if you are, again, a single person with no dependents. If you have a dependent, it's a little bit different. So please try to plan so that you do not anticipate taking out student loans. And if you are looking at an offer that is maybe questionable on whether or not you can afford a decent lifestyle on that offer, please consider whether you can have another job. Job is the wrong word, a side hustle, some source of earning that is outside of the stipend. Again, this is not ideal because during graduate school, you should be focused on getting that degree and put your best energy towards that. But I also do think that a low hourly commitment per week for a side hustle is very manageable for most people in graduate school. But you have to make sure that this is allowed. If you're an international student on an F1 visa, this is a no-go situation. You cannot plan on having a side hustle. If your contract explicitly tells you that because you're getting funding from XYZ source, you are not allowed to have any outside source of income, usually it's not phrased that way, but that would be like an extreme form, then you know that you're not allowed to do that. Or it might say something like you're allowed to have a secondary job for up to 10 hours per week. Like there might be some kind of limitations, but it is allowed. So you really need to feel out what that environment is and whether or not having a secondary source of income would be an okay thing to do during graduate school. Okay, let's say student loans are an inevitability and we can't find our way around them. In terms of federal student loans and also private student loans, at the graduate level, there is no subsidized student loan. So at the undergraduate level, you can take out subsidized student loans, which means that for the time that you're enrolled in school, the interest that's accruing is being paid on your behalf. So it doesn't accrue to your debt load. However, once you get to graduate school, subsidized loans no longer exist. So the interest would be accruing during graduate school if you take out any student loans, whether federal or private. However, there's another wrinkle here because all of the student loans news that has happened in recent weeks, one of the things that's been in the works for about a year, but they just changed the name of it, is called the SAVE plan. So it's one of the income-driven repayment plan options that will be available starting about a year from now. The reason I'm bringing this up is that if you had, for example, your undergraduate student loans in the income-driven repayment plan, the SAVE plan, your interest, the interest is paid on your behalf to the degree that it exceeds the payment that you'd be making each month. And this is like a little pretty technical and complicated, but I just wanted to let people know about this possibility that if you have unsubsidized loans from your undergraduate degree, you could get them subsidized in a way by enrolling in the SAVE plan. But again, it's very technical and complicated. I'm not giving advice to you, just something to look into in the next year and between now and when the SAVE plan becomes available. So very difficult to avoid interest on student loans taken out during your graduate degree, though, because you can't enroll student loans that are for a current degree that you're currently pursuing. Those have to stay in deferment. You're not gonna be able to put them into one of these income-driven repayment plans. Okay, Jane, was there anything like any other sub questions there that I didn't address?
I think you did a really great job, actually.
Okay.
I guess the last one was like, do you have to repay it, in a certain time frame, and do you want to pay it right away, like when you get out of grad school?
Yeah, so this definitely depends on the degree of student loan debt that you're in. For instance, how it compares to your annual salary the first year after you get out of graduate school and have that career job. If your student loans are like 1, 2, 3 times the balance that you receive in your first year, obviously it's going to take you many, many years or decades to pay down those student loans or receive forgiveness at some point for them. If they are very minor, like, I don't know, 20% of what you receive in that first year of your post-PhD job, then you might consider setting as a goal for yourself, I'm just going to get rid of these things as fast as I possibly can, and I'm just not going to worry about it. But it all depends on that ratio between the amount of student loan debt you end up with and your salary. If you have the means of paying them off quickly, I think that's a great idea to do so. And then you can move on with your financial life and accomplish other goals. But if they're very, very large, then that's when you're probably looking at repaying them over 20 or 25 years through one of those income-driven repayment plans, which, by the way, can be very manageable, especially with the new SAVE plan and the way they calculate what your payment is. So it really just depends on how much student loans we're talking about.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this next question is about financial emergencies, and I'm going to kind of wrap 2 questions into this one question. So what do you do and how do you handle a financial emergency if you don't, you're on this fixed income, you don't have a lot of extra funds? And then what was an unexpected cost that you wish you'd planned for before graduate school? And Alyssa, I'd like to let you take the first stab at this one.
So luckily for me, I didn't have any financial emergencies early in my graduate career. I started grad school with like 0 money, because I didn't have the thing that George had where like they help you pay for your moving costs. Pretty much all the money that I had saved during my undergrad, which was like not that much, I spent on moving and like my first rent in Knoxville. So I had like actually no money. And then I started, like I was repaying my undergrad student loans while also trying to save money. So I'm very thankful that I didn't have any financial emergencies. So I've successfully now paid off my student loans and then saved like a little bit of a savings. Like I'm talking, like my goal was like $10,000. And then I had to eat into it a little bit. So now I'm at like $8,000 or $7,000 or something. But saving during grad school was very, like, I'm so glad that I did it. My dog needs her teeth extracted, like multiple teeth, and like each tooth is like a couple $1,000. So I also have them insured. But there are some things that I could have done in advance, like in order to like even lower these costs. So like if I had gotten them like a vet check and like a dental cleaning, like upon getting them, like as soon as the insurance kicked in, like gotten that dental cleaning, then it would have been easier to like take care of her like teeth extractions now. So I'm glad that they have insurance. I like if you get a pet, definitely take that into account in your budget, but also there are some massive unexpected costs that can come from like pet healthcare. Vet bills can be a lot. When I did my podcast with like my episode with Emily, that was right after my cat had like passed away. So there were costs with that. Then I got 2 dogs and they are the most expensive part of my life outside of my rent. So just an FYI, if you're thinking about pets, they're great. I love them. I'm so happy that I got them, but they're so expensive.
Thank you, Alyssa. George, do you have anything to add to that about unexpected costs?
Yeah, I can add to that. So the first thing, I think saving is definitely great. So for me, my goal is to get like 3 to 9 months of expensive into a savings account. And I put that into a high yield savings account because you get more bang for your buck, essentially. So right now, since they're raising interest rates, high yield savings are at like 4% interest, which is pretty nice. In the case of emergencies, I think this is very particular to my university. I don't know if other universities have this, but we have this thing called an emergency grant and aid. So graduate students at Stanford are able to apply for up to $5,000 a year in emergency funds. So this was very helpful for me. So because in my first year, I had a lot of health issues. So I had like, it's a long story, so I'm not gonna tell the whole story, but I had like a bacterial infection in my hand that was in there for like 7 years that I didn't know about, and they had to like remove it. I actually still can't close my hand all the way. But yeah, like, so that took a lot. So I just, I had to pay for all of that, and I used emergency grant and aid, which was like, became a very clutch. I've also used that for other expenses as well. But I don't think that's a thing that's common at other universities. But that's how I usually, that's my first go-to for emergency expenses. And was there any other question, or was that the main thing?
That was great. And wow, that's amazing that you have that emergency fund. I've never heard of that before. Selena,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead, George.
Oh no, you're good. I was just saying it's
Okay.
super helpful.
Selena, do you have any advice about unexpected financial situations?
So in undergrad, I've been very lucky in the sense that like I've been able to work like 20 hours a week in undergrad. So I've been saving during that time. So when I moved, it wasn't like a huge cost. I did my road trip and I didn't do any flying or anything. And for me, I like my emergency fund is saving up enough for a whole year's of rent. Maybe that's too much, but that's for me. It makes me feel comfortable. And any money that I don't really need, I don't need to put in my money in my savings anymore. So I just put it into like either, I usually max out my Roth or other investment accounts. That's what I personally do. And for me, like emergency wise is always like, I think same thing with pets, where you have to like check up on them. Same thing with cars too, like do your repairs, do your maintenance early. And if you want to save money, learn how to do it yourself. So like I do my own oil changes. I recently changed my serpentine belt. I recently did the spark plugs myself. Like spark plugs, if you get into a shop, probably around $300 in cost and labor. And instead, like I myself paid $80 for all my spark plugs and changed it myself. So like you can learn how to do that if you want. Doing early maintenance is a lot cheaper than paying it out at the very end for someone to do it. So that's my advice.
Definitely. Thank you. Okay, so hard to believe that we're getting close to 5 o'clock. So I'd like to start with Alyssa and go around and ask everyone, what's your best piece of advice in terms of finances and graduate school and budgeting and making sure that you can live the life you want to live? And Alyssa, I'll let you take that one.
So my number one is definitely to do the grad school visits in some way. It doesn't have to be like the in-person visits. If they are in-person visits, preferably the ones where like they cover your like housing and travel when you're there doing the visit. And then if you aren't able to go to an in-person one, regardless, always try to talk to the grad students in a situation where you're just talking to the grad students, right? I'm not talking about like a situation where like there's other administrators or faculty present at like some of like the mixers that they have. But you can also do this by just like sending them an email. So the way that you would go about even like getting these emails in a way that's not creepy is to send emails to the advisors that you're interested in working with. And then in that email, ask, could you also put me in touch with some of the grad students in your group? I'd love to talk to them. That's like a super normal thing to ask. That's a normal thing for a professor to receive. They'll likely pick out some of the grad students that they think would be good to talk to you, especially if you have similar research interests. Then I would send those grad students a message and be like, hey, do you want to set up like a Zoom chat, right? That way, it's like honestly like less likely that they'll ignore your email for like a week or something. If they'll be like, oh, like setting up like a 30-minute to an hour Zoom chat is way less stressful than like typing out like a long response to all of your questions. Then come into that Zoom chat with some pre-prepared questions about like things you may want to know about like the work-life balance. How is working for that advisor really, right? Like, would they say something different in front of that advisor versus like in a one-on-one with you? What's like the culture in the research group like? But then also you can ask about financial stuff. Like, what is the cost of living situation? What are some things to look out for? Places that they would and would not recommend renting from. And there's like a lot of different financial advice that you can get from like the current active grad students. And a lot of times like they want you to like have the best experience possible. So they're going to be honest with you. They don't have like their university's like bottom line in mind. They're just going to tell you what it is.
Great, thank you.
I think I can build off of that too. So like I talked to a lot of graduate students when I was applying to graduate school. And another thing I wish I did was actually reaching to people that graduated from that lab. Because I think sometimes when you're working in a lab, you get a little bit tunnel vision on like who your professor is, and you like kind of put them on a pedestal. And I think one thing I realized during graduate school from people that graduated is that when they got that real job, they didn't see that professor in the same light. If anything, they might have saw them in a negative light. And when your PI is the one that might be funding you, you kind of have like that, I don't know, obligation to them. And it feels a lot of like, it's quite stressful and a lot of pressure. So like in one of the labs I worked in, like when I left that lab, I just like kind of realized in the situation I was in, and I wasn't that happy with it. And I think it's good to reach out to people reasons why they left the lab, or people that have graduated. You can find them on LinkedIn, usually on like most lab pages. They have recent alumni and how to reach out to them. So I highly recommend that.
Thank you, Selena. George, what is your best piece of advice?
So I think I could give 3 things. The first thing is that I think you should make a budget that makes you happy, not one that makes you sad. So for me, like what I did is I just tracked my finances for several months. and then made adjustments. I didn't try to like make a budget that should be the great budget. I kind of like saw how I lived my life and then tried to make a budget that enabled that. For example, like the weirdest thing in my budget is I have a budget for impulse buys because I just like impulse buying stuff. So that means I can impulse buy, but at the same time, I know when I have to stop impulse buying. So like, yeah, make a budget that makes you happy, not one that makes you sad. The second thing is don't be scared to start investing because investing early is so basically your investments grow exponentially, not linearly. So the longer you wait, the worse it is essentially. So if you start investing today, it'll just be way better than if you start investing tomorrow. For me, when I was first going into graduate school, I didn't have any investing experience. So what I did, and like other people do it differently, but I essentially did, I got like when I had no idea what I was doing, I got a Robo Roth, which is like a investment account that kind of like invests for you. And then I got a brokerage account to get some experience with investing, just kind of like a few $100, kind of learning how to invest. And then once I felt more comfortable investing, I changed from a Robo Roth to a manual one. So Robo Roths have a pretty small kind of like fee. Manual Roths are free depending on the one you get. So that's why I transferred to a manual Roth. And now like, I started several years ago and then I learned how to do it. And now like I'm just better off than if I started today once I felt comfortable doing it. And the third thing that I would say is that I was able to get a couple of jobs associated with my university. So like for me, I don't like doing stuff for free. So I always try to find a way to get paid for doing stuff. So if you could find a job with your university, or maybe like if something like that, you can get a decent amount of extra money. So right now I have a job or like a position where I think I mentioned this, help with the summer research program. I get paid like $34 an hour. I work 16 hours a week. So it's like a decent amount of money. And then I recently got accepted to an internship. There's a lot of unpaid internships. So I spent a long time trying to find a paid one. It's $22 an hour. And it's also going to be very beneficial for my career because I'm interested in like startups and potentially like venture capital and consulting and stuff like that. So I got an internship with the Office of Tech Licensing where they license out technologies, and they'll pay me $22 an hour. And that will also be a little bit of extra money to help me, save and invest and do things that I like impulse buying.
Wow, thanks, George. You're really on top of your game. I love it. Emily.
Yes, I just want to underline everything that has been said, well, in the entire panel, but especially this concluding advice. So wonderful from everyone. Totally agree with all these strategies. I think what I would add to this is that you have to understand that graduate school, a PhD program, is very, very different from your undergraduate degree. And especially your personal life is very different in graduate school, probably than it was in your undergraduate degree. And graduate school, PhD program is very long. And so my mindset around it is that you shouldn't really think of yourself as a student, even though you will technically be a graduate student. You should think of yourself more maybe as like an emerging professional or a young researcher, because you really are a full-fledged adult and whole human being. And there are lots of aspects of your life that are important other than what you're doing for your graduate program. And so, of course, finances come into play in this. I think that you should attend to your finances during graduate school as best you can. I also think you should attend to your relationships and your physical and mental health and all of these other wonderful aspects of your life. You can't just like sort of tamp them down and ignore them for the length of a PhD program, which again is very long. And so one mindset shift that I would suggest that you try to make in the process of becoming a PhD student is to identify as a saver. A lot of people, I think, will look at maybe the stipend, like we were talking about earlier, on the cost of living and say, okay, I can afford my rent, I can afford my car, it's going to be fine. Really, during graduate school, your expenses, you're going to spend on necessary expenses like your rent. Absolutely. You're also going to spend on discretionary expenses because you are a human being and you want to have a life and enjoy it, like George was saying. And I also recommend that you try to put aside some money for savings as a habit every single month, to make it a habit, to help with that identity change of becoming a saver. And that could be literally in terms of like cash savings, like we were talking about emergency funds earlier. It could be investing, like has been brought up in the past few minutes. It could be in debt repayment, like Alyssa brought up earlier. All of those things, I would say, help you form the mindset of being a saver. And so it's something that I think is really important to start during graduate school, because again, you're an adult and you're a whole human being and things are going to happen. And it's really helpful to have money set aside for your own financial security. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. And I know that you, Alyssa mentioned your podcast. Where can people go to find that information? And actually, I can post it to our Google Classroom as well. But if you maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I'm happy to. Thanks for asking. Yes, my podcast is called Personal Finance for PhDs. It's the same as my business name. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can go to my website. My website is PF for personal finance, PFFORPHDS.com. And if you do pfforphds.com/podcast, that page is a list of every episode I've published. I've been doing it for 5 years. I probably have like 150, 200 episodes. There's a lot. Most of them are interviews with graduate students or PhDs. All of the people featured on this panel have been podcast interviews in the past. You can certainly go look up their episodes, which are amazing, which is why they're on this panel. So yeah, that would be a great place to go. And yeah, anything else you want to know about the podcast?
I'm going to post the information to our Google Classroom so that our students will be able to find that information.
Oh,
And
sorry.
actually,
One more thing about what's on the
yeah.
website. There's transcripts there for almost all the episodes. So if you prefer to read instead of listening or watching, you can read on the website.
Great, thank you. And if there's any other websites or resources that anyone knows about, please send them my way and I'll post them for our viewers. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today. I actually got some good advice. I'm going to start thinking like a saver too. And and I hope that this advice helps everybody carefully think about their grad school pursuits and think about, you know, how you're going to live your best life in your graduate school program. All right, thank you very much. Bye.